Good morning, Facebook friends. And I have to report in that I do know that I'm backwards again today. I have not fixed that problem, but full confession, when I went to turn my screen again this morning and it went green, I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought of that problem again all week. So I need to do some investigating and see if I can fix that problem. But I will work on trying to get that a little higher on my to-do list this week. So good morning, and we're going to dive in here in just a minute to lesson 4. And I was just sharing with the ladies on Zoom before we got started that Matt was leaving for work this morning. He's like, what are you gonna do this morning or whatever? And we're gonna talk about the offspring of the bad angels and the people. And he's like, what? Like, that's not in there. I'm like, it is. So, interesting. So we're gonna have some talk about that and some different viewpoints on that as we dive into chapters 6, 7, and 8. And at the slow pace we've been moving up until now, it's kind of weird to try to get through 3 chapters in one session. But we're also going to do 6, 7, and 8 next week. This week we're going to talk about the overview of 6, 7, and 8, and next week we'll talk much more specifically just about the flood and the time frame of the flood and kind of dig a little deeper into that. So let's have a word of prayer and we'll dive in, huh? Father, we're so grateful to be able to gather this morning and to get into your word and to share what we've been learning and learn from each other and learn more from you. So I just lift up our class time over the next few minutes and just pray, God, that it can just be a time where we just connect with you, Lord. I say that often, but it's what we consistently need as we listen to your instruction on abiding with you, Lord. This is a part of that, to keep our mind focused on things that you're teaching us and to keep our heart connected with others that are wanting to learn, Lord, and connected most especially with you. Because I do believe, I know it to be true in my life, Lord, when I will devote myself to your instruction and to your example, Lord, then it makes a difference in every aspect of my life. And so we do our best to just kind of exhale anything else that might be going in our lives right now and really just turn our complete attention to you and what you have for us, Lord, through this lesson. And I just lift up those that are studying with us either now or watching it later, Lord. Just I thank you for them, Lord, and I just pray, God, that you continue to just encourage us to keep our hearts open to your movement, and we just do this and ask this in your name. Amen. Okay, so before we get into like review and chapter themes and stuff, I had a couple of things, if you will allow me. I wanted to share a couple of things from this book that I've been reading along with the good morning Maria and good morning Kathy, this book that I've been reading, Becoming Israel, that I've talked about a few times, Eli Lizorkin Eisenberg. And so a couple of things that we've talked about previously, but when I read his notes on chapters 6, 7, and 8, there were just a couple things that I thought were really interesting. And one is about lifespans. I think it was last week that we were talking about lifespans just a little bit. Hey, good morning, Mary Ellen. And good morning. And the long lifespans, was it last week that we were just mentioning that? We talked about that. I think that was in our study last week. And he just has this note that says, such expansive pre-flood lifespans will be significantly diminished after the flood. These seemingly enormous numbers, however, are actually very small in comparison to those given in the pre-flood stories of the Mesopotamian and Sumerian kings. There, the longest ruling king is said to have ruled over 65,000 years. I don't know. I just left that up as, like, I thought that was interesting because that's not something I'd ever read or heard before. And then there was another thing that he wrote, because last week was when we were talking about the offerings. Good morning, Lisa. And the sacrifice that Cain and Abel brought. You know, remember that? The offerings. We talked a long time about that. And this said, one of the most important Hebrew words for sacrifice or burnt offering is olah, I believe, O-L-A-H, which literally communicates the idea of going up or ascent. The burnt offering is thus something that goes up. Moreover, a related word conveys the action or the movement of offering or giving. When Noah presented the burnt offering upon the altar, the Hebrew says, and then it has the Hebrew word, and he offered the offerings. Or more literally, he presented upward something, the sacrifice that goes up. The beauty of the Hebrew language is that it is incredibly tangible, literal, and simple. I just thought that was interesting about the offering, that it's actually like when it talks about an offering, it's like the thing, the offering, but it's also the action of offering. And how, like we talked about our own offerings, and that just made me think of like an offering to God is more than like what we let go of to offer him. It's also the heart. I mean, we talked about this a lot last week, but it's the action of offering. It doesn't just require something of us, like tangible, like our money or our time, but it's the surrender of our heart also that is the offering of the offering. Does that make sense? So it's like it's all like kind of put into one action there. I just thought that was interesting given what we talked about last week. And then the last thing that I wanted to share with you that was really interesting, and for those of you on Facebook, I put this handout in the Facebook feed, just a little bit higher than where you are probably right now, but I'm going to share my screen with you guys real quick. And if you've been on Facebook, you might have seen this on there. But this is something called, did anybody see this on the Facebook page earlier? This is called a chiasm, and I'm going to, just a second, I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. Nope, not there. There. And so, I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to say it in Angie words, because that is what makes sense to me. It says, the Torah very often uses a complex and beautiful literary structure known as chiasm, and it's where the basic idea is that the words, phrases, or other elements can be arranged to mirror each other so that the text lays out a given set of meanings and then goes back through their parallels in reverse order. So it's like this. We get to here, and then we get to this main point, and then we go backwards almost. It's like, and it's just a literary structure. And so if you look at this one this is the outline of Genesis 6 through 9. You guys can see that, right? As I'm rolling through it. So the key point is 8:1, where it says God remembers Noah. And that's the only thing that's not repeated. That's like where it like comes to like the main point, if you will. But it starts here with like A is Noah, then B is Shem, Ham, and Japheth, C is the ark is to be built, D is the flood announced. But then once we get to P, this God remembers Noah, then we start going backwards in reverse order until we get back down here to Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the ark is left. It's really interesting to kind of see how the author lays out all the events, gets to this main point, and then unpacks in reverse order all the events until you get back down to just Noah. I don't know. I thought that you might think that was cool. Go ahead, Barb. What?
Will you email that to us?
Yeah, I can email it to you. Mm-hmm.
I would love to
It's on
have a copy of that.
It's on the PDF on the. Are you on the Facebook page? It's a PDF on there that you can download. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not.
Okay. Yep. Yes, I can email it to you.
Thank you.
Yep. And
that is cool.
yeah, I just thought it was kind of neat as we looked at these chapters to realize there's a story here, but there's also like a literary structure here that is kind of common in this writing. So anyway, and that's repeated.
It looks like I remember studying chiasms before, in English or something years ago.
Okay.
But I never thought about the Bible being written in chiasms.
It says it lays out a given set of meanings and then goes back through their parallels in reverse order. So, and chiasm is, it's this word right here. Yeah, CHIASM, and it plays out in other places in the Bible too. But I don't know a ton about it, but he wrote about it in here, and it was laid out so perfectly, to give us an example that I thought it was worth sharing. So, okay. Yeah, I thought it was kind of cool. So there's our little, Lisa says she thinks it's very cool. Thank you for that affirming note, Lisa Wood. All right, so let's just go over just a little bit of review, and then we'll fill in our at-a-glance for 6, 7, and 8. Just kind of quickly, the things that we've talked about so far. Chapter 1 was what we're kind of calling the details of the overview of creation. And chapter 2 is what we're kind of calling the rest of the story, as it focuses in specifically on the creation of Adam and Eve, and also resting on the 7th day. Those are the kind of the big things about chapter 2. Chapter 3 is the fall, the serpent, and it's also chapter 3:15 is a real key verse for us, in that that's the one that prophesies or declares the coming Messiah, right there in 3:15. And then chapter 4 is the story of Cain and Abel, where the offerings are received differently by God. And we talked a lot last week about how that was about the attitude of the heart, not about the physical offering itself, but the offering that he brought, that Cain brought, that was rejected, was actually an offering. Think about the action. It wasn't about the fruits and vegetables, right? It was about the heart that brought the offering. And then Cain kills Abel. And then chapter 5 is about basically Adam's generations from Seth and the death of Adam. So that's kind of where we are up to today. And if you want, we can fill in some chapter themes for 6, 7, and 8 before we get started that way. That way, they're not missing off your page. How about a chapter theme for 6? Anybody?
I just put God calls Noah, but that's...
God calls Noah. Yeah.
And God grieves over Noah builds ark.
Yes. I have God is sorry he created life because of corruption / Noah finds grace. There are these stories in the Bible that are so they're so sad and so filled with hope at the same time, in that there are these people that stand alone a lot, you know, where they're the only ones that behave righteously. They're the only ones that that are obedient. They're the only ones that find grace in the eyes of the Lord, is what it says, right? They're the only ones, and yet their willingness to be the only one creates this huge transformative change. I don't know. There's something about it that is very unsettling to me. I guess because chapter 6 theme. Yeah, absolutely. I put God is sorry he created life because of corruption. Kind of, that's like one phrase. God is sorry he created life because of corruption / Noah finds grace. But there's this I think I get afraid of how often in the Bible a person stands alone. Do you know what I'm talking about? I think about David against Goliath. I think about the prophets like Jeremiah when we studied that, and it was like he was the only one that was righteous. I read this story of Noah, he's the only one. And something about it makes me a little bit uncomfortable about how willing God is to let someone be on their own. I don't know. Does that make sense at all? I don't.
Well, it seems like it's an awful big burden to spend 120 years building an ark, and then when it's all over, you and your family are all that's there. I mean, that in itself just blows my mind away.
Well, yeah, and you think about I think about Noah, and I think about Rahab in the story, in the Joshua story,
Yes.
And their families come along with them, and they're granted, it's they're under the grace that Noah receives, or under the grace that Rahab receives, but there's no indication that these people are of the same mindset or something. I just, you just wonder what that's like. Rahab brings her whole family, maybe out of, I don't know, I can't, but maybe out of obligation, or maybe the relationships are great, I don't know, but obviously if Rahab knows about God in a way that's different than all her family, if Noah knows about God in a way that's different than all of his family, then that has to feel really lonely. I mean, think about if we were the only ones that know about Jesus in our whole family, Thanksgiving isn't going to be that much fun. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. I'm just trying to be realistic, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, that's a rabbit. I don't need to chase this early. Chapter 7. Chapter theme for 7. What do you guys think?
Final preparation of Noah for the flood, and God invites Noah to the ark. I keep trying to find something smaller and simpler.
Yeah, I know. It's sometimes, especially when a lot of chapters have sort of a couple of major points. It's a couple of big things happen. I put the water comes / everything outside the ark dies. Water comes, everything outside ark dies. Anybody else have something? Water comes, everything outside of ark dies. Anybody have something more profound? I like Barb's is just fine. No problem there. And then chapter 8, I have waters decrease, Noah sacrifices, God makes a promise. Waters decrease, Noah sacrifices, God makes a promise. Anything else there for chapter themes that's important or significant to you?
You got it.
You think I did good? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's jump into 6 then. And in verse 1, we talked about how the men began to multiply, which goes back to like 4 and 5, where the commandment has been to be fruitful and multiply, right? So this is what God instructed. Seemingly, this is what God intended. But there's something right off the bat that's disconcerting. Disconcerting, is that the word?
Disconcerting.
Yes. For chapter 7, Maria has God closes the door. Yes, very good. That's important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is
And if you look at that, it's really like that parallel thing, that chiasm that we were talking about. I thought that was one of the interesting ones, because I don't remember what letter it is that God. So God closes the door is Noah. Okay, so K on that like triangle, that half triangle thing, is God shuts Noah in. And then the reverse K on the other side is Noah opens the window of the ark. And so it's like this, there's the closing in this part, and then a few steps back, then there's the opening in this part. It's interesting. But so what's happening in chapter 1 with the sons and daughters? What's the situation that's going on here?
You mean chapter 6?
Oh, it's chapter 6. Verses 1 and 2. Sorry.
6.
Yes. Go with what I mean, not with what I say. Come on. You know what I mean. Yeah, so there are daughters as well as sons were being born and multiplied on the earth. And then what's happening here in verse 2?
Sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful.
Yes. Yes. And probably we read, so there's this contrast, right, between sons of God and daughters of men. And there's a couple of ways of thinking about this. We don't have a concrete answer for this for sure. But there was, what were the couple of ways of thinking? I don't have to do all the talking. What did you guys find that are possibilities here for what this means?
Some people believe that they were from the life like of Seth and from the line of Seth and Cain.
Yeah, because the line of Seth was the more like godly people, right? They were more interested in following God overall, and Cain, that line was not, right? And so there's this idea that maybe it's sort of like unequally yoked. Can we say it that way? Because we understand what that's talking about, right? Where people were a line of one family that wanted to worship God and be true to God, then was marrying a line that did not want that so much. Okay, so that's one way of thinking about it.
Something that said godly versus ungodly.
Yes.
Ungodly.
Yeah. I read some opinion about that as well. And if we think about that, that's one of the main reasons, right, that God will warn them later not to marry outside their tradition, right? Not to marry people in the lands around, right? Because the main thing with that was they weren't worshiping the same, and he didn't want marriages to be, again, like unequally yoked. We know what that means when I say that, right? So, and that's not what he wanted for them, because when you have that kind of close connection with someone who doesn't have the same values as you, ultimately someone's going to compromise their values in order to stay in the relationship, right? And yeah, so he warned them about that. So that's one way of thinking. And what's the other, like, more unsettling way of thinking?
I was going to say, I like this way a lot better than the second one.
The second way is the one that kind of wigs us out a little bit more, right? Yeah. What's the other way of thinking?
They were angels.
Right. Yes.
Angelic creatures of Satan, perhaps.
Yes. Angelic creatures of Satan. And what do you think? We're going to get into the cross references here in just a second. What's your... we don't know for sure, but based on what you studied this week, did you lean one way or another over what this was talking about? Did you find more evidence one way or another?
I have heard several different teachings or different messages on this, and I never knew one way or the other, but the more I read and when I got into the commentaries, the fact that they might have been fallen angels or fallen angels who possess men on earth kind of began to make a little more sense to me, just because for God to wipe out the earth with his flood had to be more than your average evil. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, yes.
More than just being unequally yoked, because he deals with that other times in other ways. But there had to be some more kind of evil for him to me, for him to wipe out everything.
Yes.
I agree with that. I don't like it, but I still agree with it.
Yeah, I'm concerned that the Facebook people aren't hearing all that, so I'm just going to repeat it a little bit. Joyce Wisely is saying that the more she studies this, and I have to agree with you. I lean towards agreeing with you, because what she's saying is God doesn't deal with unequally yoked throughout Scripture this way, right? He doesn't deal with, there seems to be a concern, a level of concern from God. I mean, and God's in charge. I'm not trying to, like, it's not like we're threatening him or something, but you know what I mean? Like, there's this need that has a greater impact than other things that are evil. How did you call it? More than your ordinary evil, I think is what Joyce, was that what you said? Yeah. More than your regular evil. Yeah. I want to read this note that I found in Enduring Word. I know some of you use Enduring Word, so you might have read this also. But it says because Enduring Word leaned to the side that these were fallen angels. Basically, that's what it was saying. And it says, we can deduce why Satan sent his angels to intermarry with human women. Satan tried to pollute the genetic pool of mankind with satanic corruption, to put something like a genetic virus to make the human race unfit for bringing forth the, quote, seed of the woman, the Messiah promised in Genesis 3:15. I thought that was such a, it's like this deep, twisted view on it, as if, like, Satan, either like what Joyce was saying, either like by possessing people or by these fallen angels being in human form. This is so bizarre to us. I recognize that it's so bizarre to us. But I think it's definitely worth studying. It's in there, right? I think it's really worth studying and thinking about. But that the Enduring Word was suggesting that Satan, that this is like a plan trying to pollute the genetic pool of mankind to make it impossible for the seed of the woman, the thing that God had said would crush him, right? Earlier in Genesis. If I pollute the people with this extraordinary evil, as Joyce was kind of saying, then it will be impossible for something to be pure enough to override me. Those are my words, but that kind of seems to be the sentiment that Enduring Word is saying. Go ahead.
Well, weren't there other references, and maybe, because I did Enduring Word too, where there's other scripture that says angels are sexless, or angels can't have sex?
Yes.
But I thought there was still reference to Satan changing things maybe so that it was possible.
Yes.
That's where I think the demon possession came in.
Yes.
That for this period of time, it was accomplished in some way.
Yes.
And it just makes more sense to me that would be the kind of evil God would want to destroy.
That could be the kind of evil that God would want to destroy. I don't disagree with you at all. And again, like, I don't have a solid answer to be like, yes, this is the answer. but there's something about it that does seem, there's all kinds of sexual immorality that's addressed throughout the scriptures. There's all kinds of sin that's addressed throughout the scripture. He brings destruction, like, through the prophets and with the capture, the Assyrian, Babylon. We've studied those kind of things before. He deals with things, but this just does feel different. And so, let's look, because I want to address your question about, we looked at some other things. Let's go to a couple of cross-references and see what they led us to. On page 50, we looked up a couple of things in Job. And I liked the commentary under that about Satan, the 1 and 2, and Satan almost succeeded that part. Lisa, what you're talking about, was that an enduring word? Put in there. Lisa's talking about some other things in commentary. Put in there if you're talking more about what was an enduring word, because I only wrote down part of it. So page 50, number 2, A and B from Job. When we looked at the Job ones, I wrote down in both of those cross references that those were angels with Satan, like when Satan comes to tempt Job, and like Satan and the angels came. So there was this idea that was almost like a group of them hanging around together. The main troublemaker and all of his, like, what do you call those people that are like that hang around people? The bully assistants. I don't know what they are. I know. Yes. And then page 51C, still in Job. It was talking about angels at the earth's formation. And then in 3, like the question there, page 51, number 3 at the top, in the context of Job, how would you describe the sons of God? Because how this is translated, we were looking at something that was still translated sons of God, the way in 6 it was translated sons of God. But what do these sons of God mean? What's that referring to?
Ministering to God's works.
Yeah, so, and tell me if you found something different, but what I saw there was they were angels who were with God but joined Satan. That's what they were calling the sons of God in Job. That's what I thought. Is that what you guys, is that what you saw in there
That's
too?
what I had.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
I had a question mark behind it.
Did you? Yeah. This is tricky.
Yeah,
I don't.
because I thought, but that's what I got.
Yeah, I remember when I was writing it, like, I kind of don't want to write this down, but this is what I'm thinking this is his meaning, right? Yeah, so there's this idea that as Satan wanders to and fro, or whatever it says, right, and he's going to, and he's looking for Job, right? And so there's this idea that Satan is doing that, but he also has these little groupies, or whatever, right, that are with him, that in the book of Job are described as the sons of God. These are angels that were once with God, but and it just sounds crazy to us, but decided, I don't know if even that's the right word, that they'd rather hang out with Satan than stay with God.
I saw in this one commentary that the sons of God, they defined it as a council of ministering angels who report their activities to God periodically. Satan, being an angel, also had access to God. So whether they were Satan's angels or whether they were just angels that were doing God's ministering, totally confusing.
Don't be frustrated with me. Will you read that one more time? Because that was a lot of words. I want to hear it again. This is something.
It's a council of ministering angels who report their activities to God periodically. Satan, being an angel, also had that access to God.
And that was how it was describing.
And this was from Job 1:6.
Yeah.
When the sons of God came before him and Satan was with them.
Mm-hmm.
Satan also came.
And they're kind of defining what sons of God are. That's So there's this idea, that, because remember about the 4 falls that we talked about a couple of weeks ago when Joyce found that stuff in, we found it in Enduring Word, didn't you, Joyce, under the Ezekiel stuff. And one of the falls was that he would no longer have access to heaven, right? Do I remember that correctly? And then, which indicates at some point, then he does have access to heaven, right? I don't have that pulled up right now. Lisa's typed in a couple other things that I'm going to read to you guys. I got to scoot a little closer so I can read it. Forgive my fingers and stuff. Facebook. Here's some things from Enduring Word. I probably pulled out a piece of it, and Lisa took time to type some other things. The Savior could not be born of a demon-possessed mother, so if Satan could succeed in infecting the entire race, the deliverer could not come. That was a quote in Enduring Word. And Satan almost succeeded. The race was so polluted, oh yes, I remember reading this now, so polluted that God found it necessary to start again with Noah and his sons, and to imprison the demons that did this so they could never do this again.
Again.
Yeah. And Maria says,
There had to be something more.
something
There just
more.
had to be something more. For God to like
Lisa-
that.
I think the whole
It had to be
team
serious
was
stuff.
Lisa says, the never do this again is key to me. Like, Joyce is not regular. Like, this can't happen. Like, we have to not do this. Because I guess I was, Lisa says, now we're going to need a study on demons. That'll be popular. Join Angie Bauman for an in-depth look at demons. What was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. Maria said, do they become known as demons once they change their allegiance, or are demons different altogether? That's a good question. My gut tells me, with no study or anything, that they're demons once they change their allegiance, because it talks about how they used to be with God and serve God, and then they chose to do something different. And so the decision to follow Satan is what makes them a demon. I mean, you think about an evil person. I hate to even put those two words together, but you think about an evil person. Save a untreatable mental illness. Let's say, not, or even just an evil act inside of let's just say when we do something that would be deemed evil. That's our choice. But it doesn't make us evil. But this is like an evil presence that, gosh, is it possible that there's no good in it at all? I think there is. I just don't want to say it. There's no good in it at all, because the choice, it's like the thing that we talk about sometimes, it's the unforgivable sin. The only thing that's unforgivable is when we reject God, because he will not dwell in a heart that rejects him, right? And so it's not that it's unforgivable in that, you can still choose God and then you can have him, but he's not going to dwell in there if you don't let him, if you reject him. Let's look at this other cross-reference of the 1 Peter on number 5, about halfway down on 51. We looked up a couple of things. I want to look at the 1 Peter one first, 1 Peter 3:18-20. It says, Jesus made a proclamation to the disobedient spirits now in prison. Oh yeah, I thought that was important, because there's this idea, right? I think Lisa typed that in there. There's this idea that I've contained you somehow, right? That God has the power to do that. And then the Jude reference right there, angels who abandon their proper home. That's what I wrote down from the Jude. And then from the 2 Peter, I wrote down, God judged angels when they sinned. What else did you guys write down in that number 5? Anybody that had time to look at that on 51? Anything else that you wrote down that was important? It's all important.
basically under Jude. It's the same thing that you wrote down. Is place the evil angels chained in a prison of darkness, awaiting the day of judgment.
Judgment. Yeah, I had that too.
Yeah.
Awaiting the judgment. And
And then
that would be like the 4 falls again, right? Because there's this period that they go into the never-ending pit. Gosh, I wish I had that pulled up right now. Because there's the never-ending pit, and then there's the lake of fire and brimstone, right? So there's this, even though they might be contained now without access to heaven, then but there's still more judgment coming for the never-ending pit. I'm going to look just 1 second. If it takes very long, I'll stop. But let me look 1 second and see if I can pull that up really quick.
I really think this is one of the most fascinating studies we have done.
Is it? And who would have thought there was this much in Genesis, right? Because
I had no idea.
Yeah,
But we have addressed several things that when I have read Genesis, I have gone,
yeah.
I just think it's all been so fascinating.
Me too. I have loved this study. It's just, it's made me, so what I do, Joyce, sometimes, and I don't even mean to do this, but I think I'm not alone in this, is when I read something and I go, I kind of just keep reading. But when I do it this way, I stay right there,
Look it up.
and I'm like, what does that mean? At least to the best of my ability right now with what I know and the resources I have, what does that mean? Lisa says, I agree so much with Joyce. Who knew Genesis? Yeah, she didn't say so. I agree with Joyce. Exclamation points. Who knew? Here's the 4 falls of Satan. I did pull this up. So the first fall is from glorified to profane. That's the one that's already happened. And this, we talked about this a few weeks ago, and the handout is in the Facebook feed also. And then the second one was fall from having access to heaven to restriction on earth. So I get that's when he no longer has access to God, like we were talking about. Again, I have not studied this thoroughly, so we may later down the line we may study something and be like, oh hey, that meant that, not that. Fall from, then the third fall is the fall from earth to the bottomless pit, and then the fourth one is the fall from the bottomless pit to the lake of fire. So there's this progression of captivity.
Did you send that to us?
I can send it when I send I shared it that day when we were talking about it, but I don't know that.
On there because
Yeah.
too fast for me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I will send it.
I can't remember it.
Yeah, I need to. I'm gonna email the
Send that
PDFs.
to us at some
Okay.
point, some way.
Email PDFs. Will I remember what that means when I get off? If like by Thursday you don't have it, somebody text me and say don't forget to email the PDFs. Okay, I'll try hard to remember. I think I'll know what that means when I get off. Okay. Okay, let's move on to then. Okay, so let's talk about this Nephilium. I don't know for sure I think that's how you pronounce it, because there's also kind of 2 ways of thinking about that. On page 51, number 6 at the bottom of that page, we looked up what the Nephilium was. What did we learn there? What did you guys find?
Giants.
Mm-hmm. There's
In the ESV, what is that? The English translation, the English Standard, it says they were half angelic and half human.
half angelic, half human. So that points us to that second way of thinking that we were just discussing.
That I haven't found.
Yeah.
And that they were, in Numbers, they were giants that were seen when they were spying out Canaan.
Yeah, that's
Joshua and Caleb.
That's why
Yeah,
that makes more sense that they come back and say, we can't defeat these people. Remember that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if we think that the flood wiped out those possibilities, would we think that now again on Earth there would be part angel, part human?
Good point. Good point.
I think.
I'm wiping out the part angel, part human stuff.
Joyce
I
said
think we finished that before the flood.
before the flood. Yeah, Joyce said, would they be in Numbers if they were all wiped out with the flood? Because my gut feelings,
If that was the purpose of the flood.
if that was the purpose of the
To
flood.
stop that type of thing.
I wrote down in Numbers, I don't know where I read this, that the Anak giants, A-N-A-K giants, come from the Nephilium. The Nephilium, I wrote down, looking it up in Strong's, it said bully or tyrant, giant, to fall, cast down, inferior, perish, make rot. So it does seem like they're either, it has to be again, because of what Joyce is saying, because you're right about that, Joyce. So there is again some kind of bully, tyrant, large presence that seems too big for the released slaves that are now in Exodus, right, to be able to overthrow.
And that wouldn't necessarily mean that Satan couldn't still come up with demon-possessed people.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
he's not part angel.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, the fallen ones, I read a description of that term giant. Many times they translated it as the fallen one.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That was interesting. It's all back into the whole
Yeah.
fall thing.
Yeah. Well, and we know that certainly the flood did not keep evil from coming back, right? So, but I do definitely hear your point about if the point was to get rid of these like half demon, half angel, or not half, yes, part demon people. Interesting. But the ESV says that the Numbers, Marion, was that you that was saying that the in Numbers it calls them half angel half?
It was in my ESV. I don't know whether it was Numbers. Yeah, it must have been because in the ESV, let me
Yeah,
pull that.
yeah, take a second. Maria had a comment I want to read anyway. It says, also, I like this very much, Maria, we can be reminded that angels were not created in God's image as man was only us. Interesting. Yeah, that we are created in God's image. Huh, yeah. Yeah, when you find that, because I'm interested if that ESV note is about Numbers or if it's about Genesis.
Genesis, yeah, that's what I'm looking. I'm looking at Genesis first to see if
that's nitpicky, but I think it would help us. Yeah. So, in Numbers 13:33, that's the one that we looked up in 6. Just holler at me, Mary Ellen, when you find it. It says that they were the sons of Anak, and Israel appeared like grasshoppers in their sight. And it just has a note. This probably means that they were much larger than the average man. So, but that's not only place in the Bible either, because I mean, just think about the Philistines and Goliath and how he was very large compared to other men too. So, but and then in verse 4, okay, this might confuse us even further. In verse 4, it says
Yes.
the Nephilim were on earth in those days and also afterward. And again, there's kind of two ways of thinking about that might be a reference to the Numbers account, or it might be a reference into just like what was the other thing it said? Okay, here I'm going to read this so I don't mess it up. The term "and also afterward" might be a reference to the Numbers account, which is after the flood. Some scholars think that this phrase refers to the time of Genesis 6 and that there were Nephilim on the earth before that time. So there's debate about whether the afterward is like afterward in Genesis 6 or afterward after the flood. And that just muddies it all up even further, for me anyway.
Mhm.
And Joyce Heller said, I'm coming this morning to get some answers. And I was like, oh.
Well, I could go all over the place.
I
with
know,
this.
yeah. It's, and again, it goes back to, it's kind of like when we were talking about the marriage thing. And, I was just like struggling, like, how do you present something? And I felt like the Lord just really reminded me that study isn't, like when we study the Word, there is this mystery to it sometimes that I think the most important thing is, what do we hear from, okay, where do we find life application? Which I know right now we're like, I don't know where we find life application in, demon-possessed angel, whatever, but it's there. And then, what are we willing to wrestle with in terms of the mystery of what we don't understand? Where's the heart of God in this, right? And what do we learn about our own lives about looking at the heart of God? And I think one of the big things for me always as I look at these kind of passages is evil may win for a time, but evil does not have the last word ever. Like that, and I think that's something for us to know. I'm reading, I just finished last week that the Beth Moore book, Chasing Vines, that I've been talking about a lot. And she talked about, there's one whole chapter on manure, she just calls it manure, because she talks about like what a plant needs, what a vineyard need, what's a grapevine need in order to flourish. And so she just talked about how sometimes things are just manure in terms of like, it's like fertilizer for further growth. And maybe it feels like it doesn't have a point, and sometimes it doesn't have a point, and yet the point is it helps us grow. And there are some things in our life, I think, that are wrong. They're injustices. They're like someone didn't treat us right or something. And like that's, I don't know, sometimes we want to find this deep meaning in something. And then her suggestion was at the bottom of the chapter, she was like, manure happens. And then it's just manure, and like some evil, some evil is like that. And then other things are, but I think we can have confidence in, my point is this, we can have confidence in that all evil God deals with, right? I think all evil God deals with in us and in the things that happen to us and then things that we do to other people. Like, he is concerned about evil and he does deal with it. And that's one of the things that, I don't know, I've been reminded as I've read through this about the flood again. What seems like a familiar story, but holds a lot of other things in it also.
All of other things.
Yeah,
And-
yeah. Go ahead, yeah. Yes, you found it, yeah.
I can't find the half angel, half human thing, but I did notice when Joyce said that down here, I'm reading David Jeremiah a blurb from Numbers 31 to 33.
Yeah.
And it says, their bad report, this is about the Nephilim. Their bad report claimed that the land devours, this was about from Canaan, devours its inhabitants, and that they saw Nephilim, giants in parentheses, but they saw no such thing. Nephilim ceased to exist during the flood. So,
like, does
that's
it?
what David Jeremiah says. This is his blurb.
So it's what I hear you saying is it's suggesting that the men reported that they saw Nephilim, but perhaps they actually didn't.
They were giants. They saw giants, but they were not Nephilim, according to this.
Because that goes with what Joyce was saying that the half.
It says that, but they saw no such thing because Nephilim
were destroyed
during the flood.
Interesting.
So that would mean there would be, if they were half angel, half human, they're gone.
So think about this, like so if they saw, let's say, large people, right?
Yes.
And so sometimes in our fear, we make things worse than they are, maybe even. I think that's what David Jeremiah is suggesting, that they come back with this.
If they grew up hearing these stories, would they have heard these stories?
That's why I was pausing too. Well, from Noah's descendants, I mean, like we do. Yeah, you would think.
That's true.
Yeah.
And then if it was folklore, maybe they used that just to describe something you're afraid of.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Almost like sometimes when your fear exaggerates something inside you.
Right.
Yeah. And then you speak your fear, not the truth sometimes. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Interesting. That's it. Thanks for sharing that. That's an interesting take on that also. Yeah. Yeah.
Find that half angel.
That's okay. Yeah.
I didn't make that up.
No.
Sure.
I don't doubt you. Okay, so then let's look at verse 3 because we're making it so far. So we've got three chapters to go, and in 45 minutes we've done 2 verses. You guys, I hope you packed a lunch. All right, no, we're gonna get there. Okay, so and then it says God's Spirit in verse 3 would not always strive with man because he was also flesh, and this word strive kind of struck me, and I wrote down what it was in a couple of different versions. In the NLT it said put up with. In the Message it said breathe life into. In the NIV it said contend. In the HCSB it said remain. In the NRSV it said abide. So there's like some of the versions are like abide with or strive with, but others are like put up with or contend with, like it was problematic. I just thought that was interesting. The Hebrew word is diyn, and it meant a straight course or a sail direct. And I'm like, what? But you think about this like we can't move together in the same direction, or we can't be on a straight course together. I don't know. I thought that one made me pause. My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years, which is, I read that there's a couple of different takes on this too, but that is like it's 120 years until the flood comes. Is kind of the most. Is that what you guys found this week too?
Yeah, that's what I got.
Okay, so not that they would only live 120 years after the flood, but that it would take 120 years for the flood.
When I first read it, that's what I thought. But
I think yes.
The more I looked into the documentary things, that I thought, it means they're gonna be gone after this flood.
Yeah. So I'm not going to sail on. I'm not going to contend with. I'm not going to behave like this, remain with people forever. In 120 years, this is all going to change. But not that God needs that time, but that Noah, I think Noah more than anybody, right, needs that time to prepare for what's coming, right? Yeah. Plus, it just again goes to show you how many, how often, how many chances. Yes, you know what I'm trying to say. How much mercy
gives you.
Yes, yeah, and it takes me back
over and over.
Takes me back to those prophecies, like over for years, and prophets, and turn back to me and stop doing this, and So, verse 5 it says, "The Lord saw man's great wickedness," and this just grieves me so much. Every intent of man's heart was only evil continually. only evil continually. And 6 and 7, he's going to blot out man. Oh, he was sorry and grieved, and he was going to blot out man and everything. Yeah, grieved to his heart. Is that what it says? It grieved
In his heart.
in his heart. Yeah, this says in his heart. Yeah.
Grieved in his heart.
Yeah.
That's sad.
About this
When you
too.
grieve God's heart.
When you Joyce, that's beautiful, awful but beautiful. Yeah, it's so sad.
I mean, it
Yeah.
you know, that I thought, oh my.
When he has
You know,
gifted us, I
so-
know somebody else had a comment, I'm not going to forget that. When he has gifted us with being made in his image, right? And he's given us so much and asked really so little of us.
Nothing.
And for our
except
behavior
love.
to be such that it grieves him to his very heart it's just
It's
devastatingly sad. Yeah, exactly. Somebody else had a comment. I don't want to forget that. Somebody else had something to say.
It's just a comment. It's
Yeah.
not anything else. But if you think about, it took Noah 120 years to build this. I mean, and it was so corrupt at that point. But when he started it, just think in 120 years how much worse it had to be. Talk about grief. I can't imagine how it couldn't grieve God's heart. It had to be getting worse by the minute,
Yeah.
and in 120 years of those minutes.
Yeah. Maria
It breaks my heart.
Maria writes, he is relentless in his pursuit of us, and I think she knows I say that all the time. I talk about God's relentless pursuit of me, and it's not just me. It's just some words that I use a lot because I feel like there are so many times in my walk that I'm just kind of like, I have no idea why you didn't give up on me, and not because I was like continually evil of my heart, but just he's been like, it's just been, I don't know, relentless with like, no, not I think, because he knows, but just, I want something more for you. Like, just not giving up that I could live in more abundance and connected relationship with him. And he just never gives up on that. And I feel so bad and so good for Noah at the same time, because if there's anything worth being that different about in culture, it's knowing God and having his grace in your life. It says Noah found favor in the Lord's sight. In some versions it says, what does it say in ours? Noah found favor in the eyes. Some versions say Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. What a beautiful description of a character, of a person, right? To be able to find grace in the eyes of the Lord. And then it moves to the generations of Noah. It talks in verse 10 about his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and that Noah was righteous and blameless and walked with God. And we talked a little bit about Enoch last week. There's a chart on page 147 where we kind of like compared. Didn't we compare Noah and Enoch? Is that kind of what we did? Or we just wrote down kind of what the Bible says about them?
Yeah.
What are some things that you found in different places? These were in a bunch of cross references, but we put them all on this chart. If you had time to do that, it's 147. I think it's in the appendix. But just kind of what are some things like, so I did mine from like just in order, like as I went down. I don't know if you guys can see that, but so I don't want to confuse you, but like from the Genesis, I wrote down he was the son of Lamech, father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, found favor with God, instructed by God to make the ark. Noah followed the Lord's commands, and he offered sacrifices to God. That's what I found in the Genesis, in the pulling out from the Genesis things we were talking about. And then in Hebrews 11:7, I wrote, by faith Noah became an heir of righteousness. Remember? Yeah.
It's the by faith.
Yes. Remember, for those of you who did Galatians, right? That goes us right back to what we
is by faith too. It said
Yeah.
by faith.
All righteousness is by faith. Like we studied that.
By faith.
Yeah, that was so key. And when we studied Galatians, that it is about faith. And even in Genesis 12, when we get to Abraham, I mean, we're not going that far in this study, but it talks about how by faith Abraham was made righteous. Faith alone makes us righteous. In Isaiah 54:9, I put, God promised that the waters of Noah would not flood the earth again. In Ezekiel 14, Noah saved only ourselves with our righteousness. We save ourselves only with our righteousness.
Righteousness.
And again, it's not our saving ourselves with the righteousness, it's our believing in Jesus Christ, and by his blood we are saved and made righteous, right? There's nothing that we can do to save ourselves. And though we work hard and try, do we not? Why can I not just be satisfied in what he's offered me? In the Matthew 24 and the Luke 17, you guys following me okay still, kind of as we go through this? It talks about how the second coming will be like the days of Noah. What did you think about that when you read that? What does that mean to you?
Well, he had told them about the flood. He warned them. They didn't take any credence in what he said, and it'll be the same way when the end times come.
Yeah, isn't this the one where he's like,
and that's it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this the place that they were like, oh, they're still eating and drinking and marrying and having fun and all, right? Yeah, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it'll be just like that, where they've been warned that something is coming and they're not ready at all. You know. Yeah.
Don't pay any attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Second Peter. Go ahead, Joyce. Yeah.
Angie.
Yeah.
Maybe even after class. This has nothing really to do with anything. I had in Job, both Job 1:6 and Job 2:1. Angels came to present themselves to the Lord. Satan also came. God, what I remember reading is God cannot look on evil. How did Satan come before God, and why did God let Satan come before him? And then I know later he threw him to earth, in that 4 falls. But that just struck me. How did Satan come before God? Why did he let it?
Based on what do you feel like God does not look upon evil? Where do you?
Who was it that was in the crack of the mountain because he couldn't see his face? And
Moses.
It says,
Jesus
saved us through his death because you have to have your sins atoned for because God cannot look on evil.
Well, I think, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I think that story about Moses is more about Moses' sin cannot get close to God's righteousness. I think that's about God being so righteous and we're fallen, and so we cannot be in the same vicinity of God's righteousness without
righteousness.
Without
and that's what I'm thinking. Mm-hmm. So how did Satan? Because Satan is the epitome of evil.
So that's different. Okay, so Satan can look upon God, and I'm gonna just say, because he's not a person, that he's an angel.
That's kind of what I would think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
I think that has.
Right.
That's what.
Yes, he's an angel.
Yeah. That's just my gut. That's my gut answer. That he's an angel, not a person, and so it's different.
Okay. Thanks.
Well, don't send me a check or nothing, because I don't think.
I told you I was looking for answers.
Well, I'll give you an answer. So 2 Peter, Noah was protected because of his righteousness, and the 1 Peter one, God was patient in his judgment while Noah built the ark. We kind of were just talking about that a minute ago. God was patient in his judgment while Noah built the ark. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything else on the Noah list that struck you as important? How about then if we get back into chapter 6, God described the earth in verse 11 as corrupt and filled with violence, and all flesh had corrupted their way. Corrupt and filled with violence. It reminds me kind of like when you see the news reports today of like a riot, like when something goes wrong, like in a city or something, and they're rioting, and it's just all chaos, and there's looting. You guys have seen those kind of pictures on the news, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. And it's just like all hell has broken loose. I mean, like that's what those pictures look like to me, and I'm like, I guess you just stay inside or something, like if you like live in that area. Or what do you do when people are just like crazy and it seems like there's no moral foundation at all in those moments. And I know, like, I mean, we can get into like why people do that kind of thing, and that's fear, and it's persecution for I know, but but that chaos is kind of what I feel like the world was like, corrupt and filled with violence. And if everybody was like that, then what misery. I mean, how do you don't have any like connected relationships or anything like that. Like the things that are the most important can't be there if everybody's just out for their own and everybody is evil. And I don't know. What was that like? God said in verse 13, all the end of all flesh had to come. And then he told Noah, verse 14, to build an ark. And again, we're not going to get into the details of like the building and the flood and stuff, because that's all covered in the next lesson. So next week we'll really camp on building the ark and the time frame of the flood and kind of all that stuff, just so you know. But
what do you think for the 120 years or however long it was that it took Noah to build that ark? What do you think he had to put up with the evil that surrounded him, and how he had enough faith to stay away from it?
Here's the thing. So 120 years, I don't think we can really grasp that. Like, let's work on a project that God calls you, it's going to take you 120 years to build. And I think, like, sometimes I've heard people, like, talking about, like, oh, people probably made fun of him or whatever, whatever. I can't even imagine. Of course people made fun of him, but it had to have been so much worse than just, like, being made fun of or ridiculed. And if he was the only one that found grace, then there is kind of this indication that the rest of his family kind of came under the umbrella of his grace. I don't know that for sure. But what was it like at home then? I mean, if he was the only one that had that relationship with God, and the only thing, in my opinion, that would sustain you is that connected fellowship with God throughout this journey of trying to fulfill this calling that he had placed on your life. There would be no, and as someone who like kind of struggles with this insecurity, this is probably like the first place that I go because of it, but I'm like, to receive no human affirmation for that kind of calling, project, investment of time, labor, resources, in the midst of all of this like chaos, confusion, ridicule, and to have no human affirmation ever. And it doesn't say that he never did, but I mean, based on what we're reading, you know,
right.
The only way you can sustain something like that is if you do the John 15, abide in me. And I know this is like pre-Jesus, but I mean, like, abide in me and I abide in you, right? But I don't know. That's some faith is what that is.
Yes, great faith.
Yeah. And I think, and it's also God's great mercy, because I have to believe that daily, hourly sometimes, God was reaffirming that in Noah, right? They had to have this communication constantly so that Noah could kind of stay above whatever else.
Because he's building an ark, and he doesn't know what an ark's for. I mean,
there's no rain.
He doesn't know what the flood is going to be like.
No, you cannot
he's never
see
seen anything like this.
Right.
He's building this big thing.
Yeah.
And not really knowing why.
He's preparing for something that he has no idea what he's really preparing for or when it will come. I mean, there's so much that's not written, so I don't want to just be like, I'm not saying these things are fact. I'm just like, but think about it, if there's no really understanding maybe of when it'll even be finished or how long something's going to take, how do you continue to live in that peace? Yeah.
Angie?
Yeah, go ahead.
Before the flood, am I correct? Before the flood, there really wasn't rain as we know it now, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's right.
I thought that we talked about that.
Yeah, it talked about like in the creation, like the heavens separated the rain or whatever, and that I think there was a mist that rose up from the ground. Right. Yeah. So even the whole idea was. Mm-hmm.
He had no idea.
Yep. Right. And yet in verse 22 we read, then God did according to all that he had. So then Noah did according to all that God had commanded him. So he did. And here's the thing. It's I don't know if any of you guys have read Adam Hamilton's Making Sense of the Bible, but I believe, it's been a while since I've read it, but I believe that he deals with this, like, you know, how much of the flood is accurate and what do you believe from it, you know, and all these things. But here's the thing that I think is why sometimes I think those things don't matter very much. Because here's a picture, a story of a man who held on to his faith and took steps towards his calling, regardless of what the world said, regardless of any kind of, you know, outside influences. And he was saved, but not like, sometimes we think of save only as in like we lived or we died, but and really that doesn't matter so much, because we're all going to die eventually. And so even if we're saved from a situation, it's just like we have more time to live, but we're still going to die. Like, so that's not really the ultimate salvation, right? The ultimate salvation is having this peace and rest in God, even when it's not affirmed and it's not popular, and I don't know, it's not even normal in that society that he was living in. So no matter what else I think that's the miraculous part of it. The whole flood and the ark and all that stuff, yes, all that is like really miraculous, but the most miraculous of all is that this one man stayed true when he had every reason not to, I think. But
Well, think about this. If you were outside working on an ark every day and you had to go in for somebody to your family after you got done and sit down at a table and eat with them, and how many of them are going to go, you are really crazy?
yeah, who
I mean,
knows? Yeah, who
And maybe
knows
they
what it
were-
was like.
They were faithful also. I don't know. It doesn't really tell us that, but boy, they could be, trying to persuade him daily to give this project up. I just don't know how you have that much faith.
Okay, so in chapter 7, the Lord tells Noah to enter the ark, and 2 of every unclean animal, male and female, and 7 pair of each clean animal. Did you guys pick up on that? It's not,
What's clean and unclean?
Yeah, well, you know, it's kind of interesting because there's not been any commandments about that yet, but we'll learn later, like in Leviticus, right? Yeah. That, is it Leviticus? I think it is. Yeah, I think it is, but I wouldn't, don't quote me on that. But the animals become clean and unclean there. The 7 pairs of clean animal would be mostly about, if I understand correctly, sacrifices, what you can sacrifice to God.
Oh.
Noah was, so that's kind of a question mark too, though, so because we've studied everything up to this point, and there's been no mention, right? I haven't forgotten something, have I? There's been no mention of what animals are clean and what animals are unclean.
Clean and unclean, yeah.
So that will come later, but Noah was 600 years old by this point, and it says in verse 11, here's kind of where we get this gravity of what's about to happen. The great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened, and it rained 40 days and 40 nights, which is probably something that we did know in Genesis, right? It rained 40 days and 40 nights. Yeah, that's the part that we did. Yeah. But if you can imagine this, like, this massive, almost like geyser eruption all over the place of water from below and water from above. And in verse 16, it says, the Lord closed the door. The ESV says, shut him in. So it's kind of like, I know Laura was in my psalm, the class that is meeting tonight, and we were talking last week about this, that he is our refuge and strength, and that God is our refuge and strength, and that he's a place when things are storming or brewing around us, that he's a place that we can be safe in, and he's a place that's always near. And I think about this ark kind of as that refuge or that safe place, that not only did he tell Noah how to construct the safe place, but then when the time was, he closed the door, but the ESV says he shut him in, which is like, I'm going to make sure you're in there, and then I'm going to make sure you're good before I even send the storm, you know? If we, in our own relationships with God, are deliberate and intentional about knowing and staying in and running to our safe place, then we can be in there before the storm even starts, right? Like if we stay in there, then we have this level of protection. Not that when the storm starts, I mean, even in the ark, I would be like, when the water starts coming up from the earth and bursting forth and all that stuff, that's still going to be, but isn't it so much better to be like, ooh, thank goodness I'm already in my safe place when this is happening, right? And I think that's an encouragement to us to remember that we have an ark. Like, he is that for us. And we can be in there, and he will shut the door and shut us in, and no matter what's going on around us, and we're in that safety. Verse 17 talks about how the ark was lifted above the earth and floated on the surface of the water. And verse 19, I think this is one of the most illustrative things. The high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. 21 says, all the flesh that moved on the earth perished. And 23 says, every living thing was blotted out except those on the ark. I didn't ask this question at the end of 6, but was there anything else in 6 or 7 specifically that was that stood out to you?
It's just a pondering, but
I love your ponderings.
kind of kind of like Barb was doing earlier about can you imagine, but one visual that I think I remember from a video that played when I visited the Ark was it depicted the what it might have looked like when people and animals were perishing in the water. And of course there were people whose heads were still above the water, and they were screaming and distraught. And I don't know if Noah and his family could hear all of that.
No doubt, yeah.
The animals and the people for help, and maybe not. I don't know, but it's just hard to fathom the volume of people and animals that were dying,
crying for life. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a tender-hearted.
I know. I can't.
Tender-hearted about animals, much less people. So.
And how did they not, the ones that were close and wanting in, or not let them out? Yeah, that's a whole different thing that's not in here. That has to be some part of the story, right? Yeah. Yeah. Lisa wrote a couple of things. Oh, Lisa. She says it sounds a little claustrophobic to me. Lisa deals with claustrophobia, so she's talking about being shut in. I think it was a big ship, though. I think you'd have been okay. Of course, it would have been maybe smelly with all the animals. So, I found something when I was flipping through the homework that I'm not going to go there right now, but we're going to have enough time at the end. That Joyce was saying about the angels not being sexual creatures, and I found where we did that in the homework. So we're going to go back to that. Don't let me forget. And we're going to go through Genesis 8 first, and then we're going to look at a couple other things in the homework. But that's not on my notes, so if I forget, I don't think I will. But Genesis 8, verse 1 starts that God remembered Noah, and that's that on that chiasm. That's the key. That's the climax. And then we're going to start going backwards now, like undoing these things, if you will. God remembered Noah, and he caused the wind to pass and blow over the earth, and the water begins to subside, right? And in verse 3, the waters are receded, and the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. And in verse 5, then the tops of the mountains become visible. Do you guys know who the Statler brothers are by any chance? It's an old country western group.
Yes.
Are you familiar?
We grew up with them, didn't we, Joyce?
Yeah.
Of course. Yes, we did.
Me too.
Of course we did.
Me
We
too.
grew up with everybody.
I love the Statler brothers. Fun fact about Angie. And they did a project in probably, I was going to say, the mid-70s, if you know better, called the Holy Bible. Are you guys familiar with their Holy Bible project ever?
No.
It's wonderful. I had the 8-track when I was a little girl, and I know every word of every song, but it has so much biblical accuracy. If you're a Statler Brothers fan at all, get on YouTube or iTunes or whatever you do your music and listen. And it has, it was 2 albums, because I also had the album, and it has an Old Testament and a New Testament. And it was all I could do not to play the song this week, but I didn't want to play music. But there's a song, Noah Found Grace in the Eyes of the Lord, actually, that's just all about the flood. And it's so interesting, now that I've been a Bible student as long as I have, and I go back and listen to that music, I'm fascinated of how they got a story set to song with such, like, it's so rich with the biblical, like, facts of the biblical stories. So I don't know if you guys, I just lift that up because if you like them at all, it's just called the Holy Bible, and it has an Old Testament and a New Testament.
Oh my God.
And
I can't believe
it starts.
Joyce and I didn't know that.
Yeah, it is. I
I
still can
only listen to the country western songs.
I still can sing every word of every song on that album, no doubt. But it's kind of because as a little girl, it helped me because it set the stories to music. It helped me know the sequence of events in a way that I didn't even know that it helped me, you know, but anyway, so, but the reason I say that is because as I talk about these events, I can just hear Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. No, I can hear the Statler Brothers singing the song. I'm like, yes, yes. Verse 6, Noah opens the window and sends out the raven, and then he sends out a dove that at first does not find a resting place. 7 more days pass, and he sends out a dove, and in 11, she returns with a olive branch, right, olive leaf. Then he waits another 7 days, verse 12, and sends out the dove, and she does not return. And then, did he still wait a little bit? I can't remember. Then he opens the ark, and the covering of the ark and the ground was dried up. This is in 8. Yeah, in 12, he waited another 7 days after she did not come back, and then, right, and yeah, and then he removed the covering of the ark. And the surface of the ground was dried up. And again, next week we will talk more about the time frame of the flood, and we'll look at that a little bit closer. And then what did God tell Noah that all flesh was to do?
Fruitful and multiply.
Mm-hmm. Same commandment, really.
Same commandment.
Maria says we need a class field trip to the Ark, is what she's saying. And Lisa Wood is saying it's a field trip Tuesday. Do you guys know I do field trip Fridays with my boys in the summer? At least I usually do. And so she's like, it's a field trip Tuesday. That's what she's talking about. That's funny. I've never been there, but Laura, you've been there. You said, yeah, and Joyce has been there. Okay, yeah. Do you recommend it? Is it interesting?
Oh yeah.
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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and Lisa would not get claustrophobic.
Yeah.
Basically one big room.
Yeah. Joyce says you would not get claustrophobic, Lisa. You'd be fine.
No.
Okay, and then, yeah, so they're told to be fruitful and multiply. And then Noah builds an altar, right? Verse 20, Noah builds an altar. And offered every clean animal and bird. I wish I would have looked that up, like how commentators deal with the fact that there are clean animals in Genesis 6 when we haven't talked about clean and unclean animals. I'm going to write this down.
The one I looked it up,
Yes.
it said that the clean animal was for sacrifice.
Yeah.
That's
all it said, really?
What you said, that's
Okay.
all. That was just one thing I looked up.
Well, thank
Well,
you.
that's what I assumed when I talked about it, but you're right. They haven't talked about
Right, yeah.
sacrificing animals yet. But
And obviously there's a whole lot of things that happen that we haven't talked about. Lisa's saying, haha, Joyce. But yeah, so every clean animal, and then the Lord smelled the soothing aroma and said to himself he would never curse the ground on account of man again. I will never again curse the ground on account of man. For the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. I want to look at a couple other things from the homework, but both will change the subject just a little bit. So, anybody have? Yeah, go ahead. That's what I was going to ask. Yeah, anything? Yeah.
So then Noah built the ark to the Lord and took everything and offered burnt offerings. So obvious it was something that they did. So even though they didn't talk about it before, Noah knew to do that.
Yeah. Or Noah
offered the sacrifice.
Yeah, he offered a sacrifice. He gave something back to the Lord. So this is the first time, right? We haven't talked about. Well, no, Cain and Abel brought an offering. Yeah. Yeah.
Cain and Abel.
Yeah. That doesn't say they
It
built.
didn't say anything about Cain.
No, it didn't say that they built an altar, but it did say that they brought an offering.
It did say, but Abel's wasn't a burnt offering, was it?
Good point. I don't think so.
Say it was.
Brought an offering to the Lord.
Just brought the firstling.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think it said anything about somebody
But
correcting me.
obviously,
They burnt.
It doesn't. Verse 3, chapter 4, verse 3, Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. Verse 4, Abel brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions. It doesn't say anything about a burnt offering. Yeah, not in just what I'm looking at real quick.
Not in what?
So there's a question there for me too. Is this something that God that God put on his heart just as a way to honor God? Is it just, how do we offer something back to the Lord that's just between us and God that then maybe becomes something of a habit or a tradition or something else, somebody else picks up on? I think about a lot of things that we do in church that have like maybe a deep significance from us, but it's not scriptural. It doesn't make it wrong, but it's not necessarily anything that maybe the Bible tells us we have to do. I don't know. Yeah. Sometimes I think we just have this like appreciation or recognition in our heart, and we want to try to offer it back to God, in the way that we can. But yeah, that is interesting. Anything else from those chapters that just stands out to you, or questions? I have a couple other things. So at the top of 52 is where Joyce was talking about earlier when we were talking about the angels and not being, not having sexual relations, because we looked that up in Matthew 22, top of page 52, number 7. Those who hold the view that sons of God refer to men rather than angels say that in the New Testament the term sons of God is used in reference to believers. And they cite Matthew 22:30 as proof text that it could not be angelic beings. Does it say that angels are without gender or do not marry? Record your insights. If you looked that stuff up, what did you find there?
Wrote down people will not, and I underline people will not marry or be given in marriage.
I had a couple of things from the enduring word of that. Well, actually, I wrote down enduring word, but I don't know if these things, I think these things just came right from the scripture. But I wrote down these beings are in heaven, not fallen, the ones that they're talking about. So that there's this idea that angels in heaven do not marry or have relations, and that Jesus is saying that sexual relations do not exist among the angels in heaven. Also, evil angels could have, the ones in Genesis, if that's the way we're going with that, express themselves through demon-possessed humans. So that's another way that we've kind of talked about that already. But I saw that when I was flipping through my homework looking for something else. I'm like, that's what Joyce was talking about, I think, when we did look at that this week. Yeah.
The message,
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. The message said, at the resurrection, we're beyond marriage. As with the angels, all our ecstasies and intimacies then will be with God.
I like that. Yeah. We're beyond marriage, and our ecstasies and intimacies will be with God. Yeah. That trips people up sometimes because they want to. I've been with people when they're dying, and I absolutely believe that they see and interact with people kind of as they cross, for lack of a better word, that have died before them. Like I believe that. I've seen it. I just really believe that that's true. I don't know that we have the same kind of familial or friendship relationships in heaven that we have on earth, but I also I'm confident, absolutely confident, that it doesn't matter, because whatever relationships we have are like spirit to spirit, and so we will not lack for anything. We will not be unfulfilled. And because our relationships here are human, and so they're unfulfilling. And I don't mean that like they're all negative, but they can't fulfill us the way spiritual relationships can. And I really believe that there's nothing about heaven that's going to be at all disappointing. And even if we're not lined up in family relationships the way that we are here on earth. The last thing, on 53, number 2, kind of towards to the top, we did this little like list of things that we wrote down about the Lord. Did you guys get that far and able to look at? Yeah. Just what are some things that you wrote down that you just, let's kind of end on that. What do we see about God, or about the Yahweh, Lord, in 6 through 8, Genesis 6 through 8? Somebody want to just share something from your list? I'll read some of mine, and then you guys add what I've missed. How's that sound? Does that sound like a good plan? I put that God's Spirit dwelling in us is not a certainty. God's Spirit dwelling in us is not a certainty. That God sees wickedness, that our sins grieve him. We talked about that today. That righteousness receives the Lord's favor. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Righteousness that comes through faith, right? That God provides instruction for us, sometimes specific instruction for us. That building of that ark did not come about. He didn't tell. I think sometimes we think, good morning, Melanie. We think that God gave him all the instructions, then he went out and did it. I believe that instruction came continually. I don't know that in all my experience, God doesn't give me this like massive plan and then be like, now go do it and leave me alone, right? I mean, it's like this one step at a time kind of thing. And so God provides specific sometimes instruction. It goes back to that Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. One step at a time, usually, right? One step at a time. Nature obeys God. I wrote that down. God's judgment is a reality. God establishes covenant relationship, and God makes and keeps promises. Those are some of the things that I pulled out from Genesis 6 through 8, just as we look at what the text reveals about God. What did I miss, or anything else that you guys wrote down that you felt like was important?
Well, I kind of put down, it's not really, I don't want to say emotions, but God's character too, I guess, is that he was angry.
Yep.
But he said, he was angry because of sin. He did something about it, but then he was sorry that he had to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And he saves the righteous.
Yeah.
So he's not necessarily, we know he's not a pushover type God. I mean, he sees things as they are, and then, if they're sinful, he does something about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In large doses, or today in small doses. I mean, we still hear from him today with things that we
do. And the hope is, right, and I've said this before, the closer the connection, the quicker the correction.
Yeah,
so that
I
we
should
can
say he's trying to keep us on the right path.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. With specific instructions that he's provided through his word, but that he also provides to our heart as we spend time with him and we get to know him more. Yeah. We are out of time. Anything, any last questions, comments? Anything from my Facebook crew? This time flies so fast.
Yeah.
It flies so fast. Go ahead.
I did find that thing about the half angel and half.
Yes, okay.
It was in, let me go back to it. What was it, Genesis 6?
Yeah, like 2.
Oh, here there are 3 primary theories about the sons of, this is talking about the sons of God. The term sons of God describes angels. In this theory, fallen angels saw the daughters of men were filled with lust and cohabitated with them, producing giants who were half angelic and half human. That's where I got that from.
Okay.
A second possibility is that the sons of God were the descendants of Seth, who married Cain's female descendants. And a third view is that the sons of God were powerful kings.
Oh.
Yeah, who collected wives, leading to the beginning of royal polygamy. In any case, the relationship seemed to have involved sexual perversion, with men taking any women they wanted.
Interesting. I didn't read that third frame of thought
Yeah,
anywhere
not
else.
At all.
Mm-hmm.
Not at all.
That's in an ESV study Bible? Is that
This is David Jeremiah ESV
Okay.
study Bible.
Interesting. Yep. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for continuing to look at that. That's interesting. I've never heard that third theory anywhere that I read this week. Yeah, that's the first time that. All right, well, let's have a word of prayer. Holy Father, again, we just thank you so much for this time this morning to be able to come before you and to study and to share. And, you know, sometimes we have a lot of questions. There's a lot of unknown about these things. We can't know for sure. People who have studied it for years extensively, Lord, I think faithfully still present the fact that there are a few ways of thinking about this, and we don't know for sure what all the answers are. So help us, Lord, to continue to glean from studying what we do know for sure, Lord. And what I see in this that I do know for sure is that you see the evil and you deal with it, and you reward the righteousness and provide safety for us, a place that we can live in, dwell in when the storms are around us, Lord. And so help us to claim that truth and to believe it. You are coming, and we should stay prepared. And that is true. We're told in the Gospels that when he comes again, many will be caught off guard, Lord. And I'm sure it was still alarming to Noah that the flood waters burst forth and the rain fell from the sky. That was still, and as Laura was talking about with the people that were dying, I'm sure it was still a terrible situation. But he was ready. He had done what you'd ask him to do, and he was ready. And so, Lord, just help us to be diligent in our study, in our connection with you, in our time with you, Lord, in our worship and our praise and thanksgiving of you, so that we stay ready for whatever it is that you're calling us to do next. God, just help us this week to make time with you a priority, Lord. We love you, and we lift up our thanksgiving and praise that we have this group to study together, Lord. And I just lift all this in your name. Amen. Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
Oh, Melanie, you're welcome. I'm so glad you were here for a little while today. I'll see you all later.